People say time heals all wounds. For 41 years, I carried the wound of a man legally declared deceased. But 6 months ago, my husband, William Andrew Davies, knocked on my door. Do you think this is a miracle? A cinematic tale of lost love finally reunited? You are wrong. This is the story of a dark truth, buried for nearly half a century in frozen soil, and what happened when I was forced to unearth it. I am not the naive 26-year-old girl he abandoned. I am Eleanor May Sterling, though most people call me Nana Ellie. I am 71, and I've learned that justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's a reckoning delivered by the victim's own hands. The story I'm about to share is not about waiting. It's about retribution. It's not about forgiveness. It's about the most calculated deception you could ever imagine. It began with a simple knock and ended with a decision no wife, no mother, should ever have to face. Before I pull back the curtain on this secret, subscribe to Nana's Memory Lane and leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from. Because some secrets, no matter how painful, must be told. This story begins when I was a young woman back in 1982 in the town of Willow Creek, North Carolina. Those were different times, my dears. Young women from a working-class background like mine, the daughter of a mill worker, had limited options. It was marry young or end up an old maid, as the expression went. I worked in the local tobacco processing plant, earning a modest wage, but I valued my independence. Brace yourselves, because what I'm about to tell you is not just the story of a reunion after 41 years. But the story of a woman who learned it's never too late to make the right decisions, no matter how much your heart aches, for you to truly understand. I have to take you back to Willow Creek in the early 1980s. I was Eleanor May, the middle child of a hard-working family. My father, Mr. Edgar Sterling, worked in the textile mills, and my mother, Martha, ran a small seamstress business from our front porch to help with the bills. We lived in a modest, vinyl-sided home with a porch swing where you could always smell my mama's mint tea and hear the hum of her sewing machine. I finished high school, which felt like a great achievement for a girl from the mill side of town. My daddy always said, an education is the only thing that's truly yours. Honey, when I turned 18, I started working at the Carolina tobacco plant. It was tough work, handling the cured leaves, but I earned decent money. The smell of dried tobacco was overwhelming at first, but soon it was just the scent of my paycheck. I worked from 6 o'clock a.m. to 3 p.m. I met my closest friends there, Sue Ellen, who was saving up to move to Atlanta, and Betty Jean, who came from a large family in the foothills. We were single, ambitious, and dreamed of a life beyond Willow Creek on Saturdays. We'd drive our beat-up Ford to the town square for an Aussie cola and a moon pie. Sunday mornings were for the Baptist church, followed by a huge family meal at my Grandpa Joe's farm, where the radio always played the smooth sounds of Kenny Rogers or the heartfelt ballads of Loretta Lynn. Life was simple, but it was happy. I helped my folks, saved a little, and enjoyed my freedom. Courtships in those days were formal. A boy had to ask permission from my father to call on me, and dates were strictly chaperoned. I was 5'3", with auburn hair that I often wore in a simple braid, and eyes my friends joked were too serious. I wasn't rushing to marry. As my mother always said, the right man will find you when God is ready, and the right man, or so I thought, came into my life on a chilly Thursday in March 1982 in the form of a handsome stranger who would change my destiny forever. It was March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, when I first met William Andrew Davies. I'll never forget that date because it marked the beginning of my greatest joy and my deepest sorrow. A new hire had arrived at the plant, recommended by the foreman. Mr. Jenkins, Will was 27, from rural Tennessee, and had come looking for steady work. He was tall, about 5'11", with dark, wavy hair and eyes the color of strong coffee that seemed to laugh when he smiled. He always smelled of leather and pine sol, a mix he acquired from his part-time cleaning job at the local hardware store. Mr. Jenkins introduced him to our line. "Ladies, this is Will. He'll be running the curing warehouse." Will took off his dusty baseball cap, gave a polite nod, and said in a voice that was both deep and kind, "Pleased to meet you all." Sue Ellen nudged me, whispering, "He's a catch, Ellie." But I played it cool. Will was incredibly diligent. He was at his post every morning at 5:50 am, wearing clean, pressed work shirts. At first, he only offered a formal good morning, but I noticed he began finding excuses to pass my sorting station. He needed to verify a batch number, count the barrels, or just ask an unusually complicated question about leaf quality. He always looked at me with a shy, earnest smile. Betty Jean was quick to point out that man is courting you. Ellie, plain as day, one April afternoon, Will approached my station, holding a stack of forms. "Miss Sterling," he said, "Mr. Jenkins asked me to clarify these shipping manifests." I reviewed them, finding everything in order, but he lingered. After an awkward pause, he said, "Excuse my forwardness, but aren't you the daughter of Mr. Edgar Sterling from the textile mill?" I confirmed it, and he launched into how well respected my father was. "Your father is an honorable man. The whole town speaks highly of your family's character." At that moment, I knew he had been asking about me, and my heart fluttered. That conversation was the beginning of everything. Over the next few weeks, Will found every possible excuse to talk. He told me about Tennessee, his family of struggling cotton farmers, and his mother who had passed young. He shared his plans to settle in Willow Creek, learn a skilled trade, and build a stable family life. "I don't want to chase dreams," he would say, looking directly at me. "I want to build something real and lasting." When he talked about starting a family, I felt butterflies. In late May, after nearly 2 months of shared lunch breaks and work-related chats, Will took the formal step. It was a Friday afternoon. He approached me as I was gathering my lunch pail, looking incredibly serious. "Miss Sterling," he said, "I need to ask you something vital." My heart pounded. "Would you allow me the privilege of speaking with your father? I wish to ask his permission to call on you at your home." I was overwhelmed with joy. "Of course, Will," I said, trying to sound composed. "We are home on Sunday afternoons, after church." That weekend dragged on endlessly. I told my mother, who cautiously approved, saying, "He seems serious, honey, but take your time. Courtship is for deep understanding." My father, a man of few words, simply said, "We'll see what kind of man he is when he looks me in the eye." Will arrived Sunday looking immaculate, a dark tweed suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple maroon tie. He brought my mother a small box of chocolates. He spoke to my father in the living room for nearly an hour, respectfully laying out his history, his intentions, and his plans for the future. My father, ever the interrogator, asked about his debts, his work ethic, and his views on responsibility. At the end, my father stood up, shook Will's hand, and said, "William, you seem a good and honest young man. You have my permission to visit Eleanor here on Sunday afternoons, with the family present. If after some time your feelings are confirmed, we will speak of engagement." And so began our formal courtship. Every Sunday, Will arrived, and we would talk, listen to music on the Zenith radio, and share my mother's homemade coconut cake. After 2 months, my father allowed us to go out. But always with a chaperone, usually my sister or Betty Jean. We'd go to the movies to see Burt Reynolds or Sissy Spacek. Always with Will buying me an RC Cola and a box of Red Hot in November 1982. After 8 months of formal courtship, Will asked me to marry him. It was my 27th birthday. He knelt by my mother's prize-winning rose bushes and said, "Ellie, these months have been the best of my life. I want to build that real, lasting family with you. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," I cried, fully in love with this kind, responsible man. We married on June 10, 1983. I wore a simple cream-colored dress that my mother and sister spent months sewing. Will was breathtakingly handsome in a navy suit. We were married at the Willow Creek Baptist Church. During the exchange of vows, Will whispered, "We will be so happy, my love." I promise I believed him with all my heart. The reception was a joyous, small affair in my parents' yard, with fried chicken, sweet tea, and the biggest 3-layer vanilla cake you've ever seen. We opened the dance with Always on My Mind by Willie Nelson. That night, we started our life in a small rented cottage. Will had filled it with wild daisies and honeysuckle. "Welcome to our home, my queen," he said, carrying me across the threshold. If only I had known what lay ahead, I would have clung to that moment of perfect happiness. The first year of our marriage was everything I had dreamed of. Will was the perfect husband, hard-working, affectionate, and dedicated. We saved money, walked to the plant together, and spent our evenings fixing up the cottage. He would often bring a local banjo player home on a Friday night just to serenade me. In the spring of 1984, we received the most joyous news: I was pregnant. Will was ecstatic, shouting and spinning me around the kitchen. "We're going to be parents, my love." He started talking to my belly that very night. "Little Danny," he would say, "your daddy is waiting to teach you how to throw a baseball and fish the Catawba River." Our son, Daniel Andrew Davies Jr., was born on November 15, 1984. Will was so moved he wept the moment he heard our boy's first cry, when little Danny was about 6 months old in the spring of 1985. Strange things began to happen. Will started coming home later. At first, he said the curing warehouse had a huge seasonal order, or that Mr. Jenkins asked him to take evening inventory. He also started going out more often on Friday nights. "Just a beer with the guys, Ellie," he'd say. "I'll be back in an hour." But 1 hour turned into 3 or 4, and he'd return smelling of cheap beer and sometimes something harsher. I complained gently, and he would dismiss it. "A man needs to unwind, love. Don't be so dramatic." In June 1985, Will came home truly drunk for the first time. I was feeding Danny when he stumbled through the door, his eyes glazed. "Hello, my gorgeous family," he slurred. I'd never seen him like that. My father was a social drinker, never a drunk. "Will, what happened? Why are you like this?" I asked, helping him to the sofa. He collapsed and yelled, "Quiet, woman." My head is pounding. Danny, frightened by the noise, began to cry, and Will shouted, "Shut up, kid." It was the first time he had ever yelled at our son, and a cold dread seized me. I wonder now how I could have been so blind. Young women, please listen, trust your gut. That cold feeling never lies. From that night on, the late arrivals and the drinking accelerated. I tried to talk to him when he was sober, but he always told me I was exaggerating. "Robert," I would say, "the baby is scared. We're spending money we need for the house." He'd hug me, promise to change, and blame his co-workers for insisting he stay out. But the promises lasted only a few days. In August 1985, Will started missing work on Mondays. When Mr. Jenkins reprimanded him, Will came home furious and yelled at me. "It's your fault, and that kid's fault. A man can't even live peacefully in his own home." He left and went straight to the bar. One evening in October, he came home near dawn, with a split lip and a torn shirt. "What happened?" I asked, terrified. "None of your business," he spat. "Just get me some breakfast." That day, I talked to my mother. She told me to be patient, that men felt pressure to provide. She advised me to give him time and pray. In those days, we believed we had to endure everything for the sake of the family. By late 1985, when Danny turned 1, Will was practically a ghost. He barely spoke to me and gave me less and less money for the household. "I'm running short," he'd say. "Life is expensive." I suspected he was spending most of it on drink. I had to start borrowing money from my parents for food and rent. In December 1985, I went to the plant to speak with Mr. Jenkins. He looked grim. Mrs. Davies, I was hoping you'd come. Will has been unreliable. He sometimes smells of alcohol. I tried to talk to him, but he says everything is fine. He warned me that one more missed shift and Will would be fired. That night, I confronted Will. When he heard I had spoken to his boss, he became enraged. You went behind my back. You embarrassed your husband. We argued late into the night, and he slept on the sofa. The next day, December 14th, 1985, Will returned home with a very serious face. He sat me down at the kitchen table. Ellie, I've decided to leave Willow Creek. I froze. Things here aren't working. I need to go north. They're hiring big money up near the Canadian border for loggers. What do you mean, leave? Danny and I are coming with you. I cried. Will looked away. Not now. I'm going alone. When I'm settled and earning big money, I'll send for you. My world shattered. Will, we are a family. You can't just abandon us. He hugged me, but it was a cold, final hug. It's temporary, my love. I promise I'll be back in a few months. That night, he packed an old duffel bag. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, he said goodbye. Take care of yourself, my love. Take good care of our son. Danny was asleep. Will kissed his forehead. Where are you going exactly? I asked through my tears. First Tennessee, then north, maybe Maine, maybe the Yukon border. Wherever the money is, that was the last conversation. I stood in the doorway, holding my 1-year-old son, watching the man I loved walk away. Our house became an empty shell, and the weight of our new life crashed onto my 28-year-old shoulders. I cried not out of missing him, but out of sheer terror that he would never return. The first months were agonizing. Every time I heard footsteps, I ran to the window. Every time the mail arrived, my heart leaped. 3 weeks after he left, the first letter arrived. It was short, written in his familiar hand. My dearest Ellie, I'm safe in Tennessee, helping my uncle with a bad harvest. Hard to find work here. Heading north next week. Sending $40. Kiss the boy for me. Your loving husband, Will. That $40 was a lifesaver. I bought milk for Danny, beans, and rice. The next letter came 2 months later. In March 1986, he wrote from a general delivery address in a small town in Maine, near the Canadian border. My love, I finally made it north. The logging camp is brutal, and they pay peanuts at first, but the promise is big money across the border. Sending $60. I'll be able to come back for you soon. I wrote him a long letter back, telling him that Danny was now trying to walk and could say Dodder over the next year. Will wrote only 3 more times and sent money only twice. The amounts were small and irregular. He wrote about the isolation, the hard work, and the extreme cold. He said he was living in barracks with other loggers, far from civilization. Meanwhile, I had to completely dismantle our life. I moved back home with my parents. It was humiliating, returning as a married woman with a child. My father never reproached me, but I saw the disappointment. He had trusted Will. My mother, bless her heart, was a rock, helping me care for Danny so I could work. I found a job cleaning houses for wealthy families downtown. I earned very little, scrubbing floors and laundry by hand, my hands raw and chapped from the harsh lye soap. The physical labor was hard, but the loneliness and uncertainty were unbearable. At night, I would cry into my pillow, wondering if Will would ever return. In late 1986, after 6 months of absolute silence, I knew something was wrong. I wrote to the last address in Maine, but the letter was returned, address unknown. Then, I received a very strange letter, not from Will, but from a man named Cyrus. The letter claimed Will had been in a logging accident, had a severe head injury and couldn't write. He was recovering, but it would take time. The letter offered no return address or contact number. My mind, clinging to hope, wanted to believe it. But my heart knew the emptiness of that story. Why couldn't Will write with his left hand? Why no way to follow up? I spoke to my father. He was blunt. "Honey, I think that man abandoned you and doesn't have the decency to say it." The doubt grew into a terrifying certainty. I needed to know the truth. With the savings I'd scraped together from cleaning houses, I bought a bus ticket to Maine. I left Danny with my mother and went north. The trip was 2 days of discomfort, fueled by my mother's fried chicken and my desperate fear. When I arrived in that tiny logging town, I realized I was looking for a needle in a haystack. There were hundreds of transient loggers, dozens of camps. For 3 days, I went from camp to camp, asking for William Andrew Davies. Some remembered a Will from Tennessee, but he left long ago. Others had never heard the name. At a diner near the last bus stop, an older man told me something that chilled me. "The young fellas who come up here, they're desperate. Some get involved in the illegal timber crossing into Canada. It's big money, but the crews are rough, and the border patrol is rougher." I knew a Will who got caught up with a bad crew. Heard he disappeared one night. I returned to Willow Creek with a broken heart. I hadn't found Will, but I had found enough clues to mourn him. Either he was dead, caught by the ruthless lumber crews or the border patrol, or he had simply decided to vanish. I stopped waiting. It was the hardest grief, mourning a death without a body, saying goodbye without certainty. But life had to continue for my son. For the next few years, I clung to the idea that he might just be in trouble he couldn't write about. But by 1990, Danny was starting kindergarten, and the silence had stretched for 5 unbearable years. My father insisted, "Ellie, you have to move forward. We need to make this official," accompanied by my father. I went to the county courthouse, Mr. Vance, an older records clerk who handled such matters, explained that after 5 years of no contact, we had a strong case for a presumptive death declaration. The process took over a year. I presented all the letters, got testimonies from Mr. Jenkins, my friends, and my family. Finally, in late 1991, a judge officially declared William Andrew Davies legally dead. I received a legal document that allowed me to consider myself a widow, which felt strange. How could I be a widow with no grave to visit? That piece of paper was both a permission slip and a curse. It allowed me to restart my life, but it forced me to bury a part of my hope alive. With the legal document, I focused on building a new future. Thanks to a recommendation from a woman whose house I cleaned, I got a job as a secretary at the Willow Creek Agricultural Department. The pay was nearly double what I'd made at the tobacco plant, and it offered benefits. The director, Mrs. Hazel, a kind and educated woman, encouraged me. "Ellie, you're smarter than this. Get your degree." In 1993, at the age of 38, I enrolled in night classes at the community college. I studied business, history, and finance for 3 years. My mother watched Danny. I slept few hours but had a clear goal: to give my son a better example and a better future. In 1996, I earned my 2-year associate's degree in administration. Danny, then 11, was in the front row of the auditorium, cheering. "That's my mama," he shouted. With my degree, I was promoted to administrative assistant at the Ag Department, a respected position with a good salary. During all those years, good men showed interest: widowed farmers, teachers, businessmen. But the pain of Will's abandonment was too raw. I had discovered my own strength, and I liked my independence. I'd rather be alone than in bad company, I would tell my friends. My son, Danny, grew up to be a wonderful boy. He never truly knew Will, so he didn't ask many questions. I told him his father had to go far away for work and couldn't return, but that he loved him very much. My father and then my new husband, Tom, became the father figures he needed. In 2000, Danny earned a scholarship to study at a state university, and I felt immeasurable pride. That same year, I finally dared to accept the courtship of a very special man, Thomas Tom Richardson. He was an agricultural engineer, divorced, a man of quiet strength who perfectly understood the responsibilities of family. We met through work. He was patient, cultured, and treated me like a lady. He never pressured me, always respecting that Danny was my priority. In 2002, Tom asked me to marry him. I was 47, he said, "Ellie, I love your independence. I want to build a shared life, not take over yours." We married in a simple but beautiful ceremony. Danny, now a confident 18-year-old, was my best man. The years with Tom were the most stable and happy of my adult life. He was everything Will was not in the end: responsible, steady, and affectionate. He supported me when I started a small local accounting business from home, which gave me full financial independence. I had a wonderful son who became a successful engineer, beautiful grandchildren born in 2009 and 2012, and a successful business. In 2017, Tom fell ill with kidney failure. For 2 years, I cared for him with all my love. He passed away in 2019 at the age of 64. It was a profound pain, but it was a clean pain. I had the chance to say goodbye. There were no grudges, no unanswered questions. I decided to move on, focusing on my business, my travels, and my grandchildren. During all those years, from 1985 to 2025, I never heard a whisper about William Andrew Davies. He was a memory, the father of my son, an important part of a distant past. That is why, my dears, you can imagine the shock that seized me on a cold afternoon in March 2025 when I heard an insistent knock. I opened the door and saw an old man standing there. His hair was completely white, his face wrinkled, but his deep copper-colored eyes were unmistakable. "Hello, Ellie," he said, with a voice that was older and rougher, but the same one that had once whispered promises to me. "It's Will, I've come back for you." There are no words to describe that moment. It was as if a ghost had walked out of the past. I stood paralyzed, unable to speak, trying to process the impossible. This man was 68 years old, thinner, aged by hard sun and weather, but it was him. The way he tilted his head, the same large, once strong hands. "Can I come in?" he asked after an eternal silence. "We need to talk, Ellie, You're dead," I finally stammered. "You were declared legally dead 40 years ago. What are you doing here?" He looked down. "I know you have questions, my love. I have a lot to explain. I've come a long, long way to see you. I don't know why I let him in. Maybe it was the shock, maybe the desperate need for closure." I led him to the living room and offered him coffee. My hands shook as I prepared it. When I returned, Will was looking at the photographs on my mantelpiece: Danny's graduation, my wedding to Tom, photos of my grandchildren. "You've had a good life," he said with a sad smile. "I'm genuinely happy to see that, a good life." I asked, and the shock gave way to a white-hot anger. "You abandoned me and a 1-year-old baby 41 years ago. I had to rebuild everything from nothing. And now you show up as if nothing happened?" Will looked serious. "You have every right to be angry, to hate me. But please, let me explain what happened. Why I couldn't come back sooner." And then he began to tell me a story. A story of shame and failure. "When I got north," he began, "I realized the logging was a front. The real money was crossing illegally into Canada to work the giant timber camps. I got involved with a crew, paid a huge upfront fee, and started crossing. It was dangerous, illegal work. In the winter of 1986, while crossing a frozen lake, I had a terrible fall. A tree limb broke my leg and hit my head. The crew boss, a man named Silas, left me for dead. I was found by the Canadian Border Patrol. Because I was crossing illegally and involved with a known timber smuggling ring, they couldn't just treat me. They threw me in a cold provincial jail to recover. For weeks, he continued, I was delirious. When I finally recovered enough to contact you, I was so ashamed. I had failed. I was a criminal. I had no money, a broken body, and I was on the wrong side of the law. I felt like a coward who had abandoned his family. I was afraid to send a letter because Silas's crew would have tracked me down to get me back, and if they came to Willow Creek, they would have hurt you and Danny. He told me he spent years wandering through Canadian provinces, working odd jobs, always under the radar. I lived like a man with no past, he said. The more time passed, the harder it was to return. How could I justify decades of silence? I thought it was better for you to believe I was dead. For you to be happy without me, Will claimed that in 1995, 12 years after he left, he secretly returned to Willow Creek to see us from a distance. I saw your father walking a boy who had to be Danny to school. I saw you had a good job at the ag department. Seeing you safe and happy confirmed my decision. You were better off without me. You were here, and you didn't approach us. I was outraged. Do you know the pain you caused me? The suffering of raising our son alone? I know, he choked out, tears in his eyes. It has tormented me every single day. But I thought it was for the best. You had stability, a new future. I had nothing but problems and a criminal past. He claimed that in 2020, at age 65, he became seriously ill, a mix of diabetes and heart issues. The doctors told me I couldn't be alone. I realized I didn't want to die without asking for your forgiveness. I didn't want to die without meeting my son and telling him his father didn't abandon him because he didn't love him, but because he was a coward. When he finished, silence descended. I was a tempest of emotions. I understood the fear, the shame, but I was also furious that he had made decisions for us. A father's love, no matter how great the failure, should have driven him to find a way. An anonymous lawyer, a letter to my brother, something. A silence that absolute wasn't just shame. It felt like a frightening kind of carelessness. My son's words echoed in my mind. Mom, this man may be my biological father, but he is not my dad. A father doesn't abandon his family and return 40 years later as if nothing happened. I told Will I needed time. You can't just show up after 41 years and expect a decision in one afternoon. This affects my son, my grandchildren, the whole life we built without you. He said he understood and agreed to wait for the next 2 weeks. Will called daily, recounting memories, showing old photos, talking about how he had always loved me. It was clear he hoped we could pick up where we left off. But I was a 71-year-old woman with 2 husbands, a career, and grandchildren. I was an entirely different person. Moreover, his story had massive holes. If he had been working legally anywhere, even under an assumed name, why hadn't he reached out anonymously? The fear and shame felt insufficient to justify for decades of total silence. One day, I decided to test him. Will, I said, I want us to go to the county records office. If you truly are William Andrew Davies, my legally deceased husband, we need to officially confirm your identity and cancel the death declaration. He became instantly, visibly nervous. Why do we need that? I know who I am, you know who I am. Isn't that enough? That was the first official red flag I couldn't ignore. A man who had been lost for 41 years would be desperate to reclaim his legal identity. I insisted, and he finally, reluctantly agreed. At the records office, the clerk, Mr. Vance, asked for identification. Will produced a heavily laminated social security card and a very old, battered voter registration card. Mr. Vance reviewed the documents, compared them to the records of the real William Andrew Davies, and told us to wait. When he returned, he had a grim expression. Mrs. Sterling, he said, there are inconsistencies. The Social Security number is inactive in our system, and this voter ID appears to be issued in a state where your husband never resided. I need to do further checks. Please return tomorrow with more documents. Will immediately grew agitated, claiming he had an appointment, and urged me to leave. That night, he called, saying he had decided to return to Maine. I think my return is causing too many problems. Ellie, maybe it's better if I go, Will, I said, my voice firm. If you are my husband, you are not leaving until we clear this up legally. And if you are not my husband, I need to know who you are and why you're trying to deceive me. The next morning, I went back to Mr. Vance alone. What he told me turned the white-hot anger into ice. Mrs. Sterling, he explained, the documents he presented are forgeries. The real Social Security number for William Andrew Davies was archived decades ago. Furthermore, I contacted my counterpart in Tennessee. There is no record of a William Andrew Davies born on the date he provided. It is highly likely this man is not who he says he is. He is someone who knows intimate details of your husband's life and is impersonating him. I left the office with a heart that was no longer broken, but raging. Someone had been playing with the deepest, most painful part of my history. I returned home, called Will, who was shocked I was still in town, and told him to come over immediately. I had a plan. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of my own justice. For the hour I waited, I prepared the perfect snare. On my living room table, I laid out the few original letters from the real will, photographs of our wedding, and a fabricated, official-looking document from my bank. My grandson, Alex, a computer whiz, had already installed a discreet audio and video recording system, hidden cameras behind the framed wedding photos, miniature mix under the coffee table. My brother, Scott, a retired police detective, was hiding in the kitchen with Mr. Vance when George Harrison, the scammer's real name, as confirmed by Mr. Vance's network, walked in. He was wearing a new, ill-fitting suit and holding a cheap bouquet of convenience store daisies. He was all smiles. Ellie, my love, I knew you'd call. I knew we could work things out. I led him to the sofa. Will, I said, using the fake name deliberately, my son and I have talked. We want to help you. We understand your situation. George's face was ecstatic. Oh, my love, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't turn your back on your own husband. He reached for my hand. His palm was clammy and cold. But we need to talk practically, I continued, pulling my hand away. It's been 41 years. I rebuilt my life. I have my own house, my business, my savings. My second husband, Tom, was very successful. He left me a sizable pension and an insurance policy. How are we going to organize all this now that you're back? This was the bait. I showed him the fake bank document, flashing the exaggerated figures across the table briefly. I quickly put it away, feigning modesty. I don't mean to boast, but Tom was forward-thinking. I'm comfortable. George's eyes widened. His whole demeanor changed from repentant husband to calculating predator. No, my love, that's wonderful. Very smart of you. And your son, Danny, is doing well? Very well, I said, exaggerating the success further. He's a partner in his own firm. They're doing very well. And he wants to help you. In fact, he's coming over in a little while so you can talk to him about getting you settled. George leaned forward, smelling the money. That's excellent. I'll need a loan to start over, new documents. I need to get my life back, and I know Danny would want to help his old man, of course, I said. But Will, I have to be absolutely sure. Tell me, how did you find me? After 41 years, how did you know I still lived in Willow Creek, that I was a widow, that my son was successful? He stammered, sweating visibly. I just asked around. I asked for the Sterling family, and people talk. They told me about your second marriage. That you were widowed. His answer was vague, emotional. and completely devoid of any specific fact that only the real Will would have known. "You're right," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "People talk. They talk about our wedding. Tell me, what was the problem with the wedding cake that only you and I knew about? Who dropped the ring?" He panicked. "Ellie, my memory. So much time has passed. I only remember how beautiful you looked." The doorbell rang. "That must be my son," I said. I opened the door, and there stood Danny, flanked by my brother Scott and Mr. Vance. "Hi, Mom," Danny said, giving me the slightest wink. "I brought Mr. Vance and Uncle Scott. We're ready to help Dad sort out his legal problems." George, still trying to play the part, approached Danny with feigned emotion. "My son, you don't know how much I've waited for this moment." Danny shook his hand politely. "Nice to meet you, Dad. My mother has been so worried about your legal status." Mr. Vance opened a folder. "Mr. Davies," he said officially, "to begin the process of confirming identity, we need specific details of your life. Where did you work in Canada? Under what aliases?" George stammered, his composure shattering. I told you. Just temporary work. Under my own name, I decided to end the game." I stood up and walked to the wall where the documents were placed. "Will," I said, using the name for the final time, "before we proceed, there's something we discovered at the records office last week." George's face drained of blood. What did you discover?" I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "We discovered exactly who you are, George Harrison. And we discovered exactly what happened to the real William Andrew Davies in 1986. The silence was absolute. Danny, Scott, and Mr. Vance all moved slightly, boxing George in. "How?" George whispered. "How could you know?" I approached him. "George, we have known the truth since you flinched at the idea of checking your documents. What you have just experienced for the last 2 hours is exactly what you made us experience. A carefully constructed lie, a manipulation of feelings, a cruel game with a family's history." I pulled out the evidence. "Your name is George Harrison. You have a record for fraud interstates. You are part of a national ring of scammers who prey on widows who reported missing persons, not victims of known death. You found Will's name and details through an old, sealed record of a Canadian provincial jail." George collapsed back onto the sofa. "That's not true. I knew Will. I was his friend. He asked me to write. You were his cellmate," I stated firmly, holding the new documents Mr. Vance had provided. "Will was caught crossing the border in 1986 and died in the jail infirmary of complications from a head injury and exposure in 1993. He died alone, George. And he told you about his family. And you, years later, decided to desecrate his memory to steal my family's wealth. You were not his friend. You are a ghoul." Scott stepped forward. "George Harrison, I'm Scott Sterling, retired detective. We have you on video and audio admitting to your intent to commit fraud. We have warrants. We also have contact with the family of Mrs. Linda Jenkins, an elderly widow from Georgia you defrauded of her entire pension fund, who is currently hospitalized." George broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I just needed money." I felt no pity. "Walter," I said, standing directly over him, "you asked me for compassion after stealing hope from women who have already suffered enough. You feed on the grief of widows and orphans. That does not deserve compassion. That deserves justice." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Scott opened it, and two sheriff's deputies walked in. As they read George his rights and handcuffed him, he looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading. I remained completely serious. "George," I said, as the deputies led him away, "you chose the wrong grandmother. My story is now public. Your face will be on the news. I will make sure every widow in this state knows how to spot a predator like you." When the door closed, silence filled the house. I sat back down on the sofa, utterly exhausted, but at complete peace. I had protected my family, and I had finally, definitively, found the truth about Will. He didn't abandon us. He died trying to come home. The next week, the local paper ran the headline, 71-year-old Willow Creek grandmother nabs national scammer ring. My photograph was everywhere. The publicity helped. Mr. Vance's office received calls from dozens of other victims. George, facing 20 years, cooperated, giving up the names of his entire network, which operated by researching missing persons and fake obituaries. 6 months later, George was sentenced to 15 years in prison for aggravated fraud and criminal conspiracy. He was ordered to pay restitution to all his victims. My dears, my life has returned to normal, but I am not the same Eleanor. I am a woman who knows she is capable of strategy, cunning, and absolute strength. I found justice for Will, for myself, for Danny, and for all the women who were victims of this cruel scheme. I want to share the deepest lessons I learned in my 71 years of life. The first lesson: it is never, ever too late to fight. Age gave me the tools, the experience to know Will's story was flawed, the patience to plan, the contacts to gather help, and the wisdom to know I didn't have to face this man alone. The second lesson: trust your inner compass. Experience has given you a radar that is never wrong. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Act on it. The third lesson: never allow anyone to treat you like a victim. Scammers confuse age with weakness, gentleness with naivety, and loneliness with vulnerability. We older women have survived countless crises. We are not defenseless. We are unshakable forces of nature. The fourth lesson: a united family is your best protection. I was not alone. My son, my brother, and my grandson were my reinforcements. Ask for help. Seeking justice is not weakness. It is the wisdom of a general. My sisters, my mothers, my grandmothers, you are not weak. You are warriors. Every line on your forehead is a story of resilience. Every scar on your heart is a badge of honor. Never forget, age brings wisdom. Experience builds power. And a woman who has walked through the storms of life is an unstoppable force when she decides to fight for what is right. I am no longer Mary, the abandoned wife. I am Nana Ellie, the woman who refused to be trampled on. I am the woman who brought justice. That strength is not mine alone. It is inside every single one of you, waiting to be awakened. Thank you for listening to my story on Nana's Memory Lane. May God be with you and give you strength. If this message resonated with you, let's build a community of strong women together. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment to let me know where you're watching from. We'll see each other in the next story.